next episode. I'm Kelly, your Kilted Therapist. Today, I'm going to just take a couple of minutes and talk about something that doesn't get talked about an awful lot in the therapy room, and that's how to process and some self reflection stuff that is supposed to kind of happen outside of the therapy room but doesn't often happen there. So, this is going to be a brief overview, and I'll probably expound on this more later. Just bear with, it's going to take a few minutes and then we'll be on our way. So, first and foremost, this is kind of a crucial skill when it comes to doing therapy. The first thing is what we want to do is we want to identify what is the event or issue that is most pressing. And then what we do is kind of peel it by layers. Notice what feelings are popping up for you around the things that are the events that you're most troubled by. So I'm going to say, for example, the first time that I got shot at as a police officer, I had mentally rehearsed ahead of time 1,000 different ways that I could be shot at and my response to that. Now, contrast that with something that I hadn't mentally rehearsed. And the difficult thing was I had a guy who presented with a Great Dane, a 45, and he's standing in his driveway and then promptly puts the gun to his head. I hadn't mentally rehearsed for any of that. My knees were knocking. My breath had come up into my chest. My vision was starting to narrow because I'm recognizing this is going to be a really serious, significant event. And even though my adrenaline was going, I had to work really hard to meet that challenge. Long story a little bit short, just for your edification, we ended up pursuing him down to 94, where eventually we used a less lethal force option. We used a shotgun that has a beanbag in it, and that was how we were able to disarm him and safely take him into custody. Now, here's the thing about that, though. That night I got home, I was still pretty wired because this took the better part of my shift. So I've got that buzz, but what I didn't realize was that in that my fear response had gotten way heightened, as you can imagine. Because we didn't know, is he going to shoot us? Is he going to shoot himself? Is he going to hurt somebody else? How do we prevent all of those things from being the perfect storm? In that, though, the way that my mind framed this was a critical event. So in that critical event, a couple of things had to happen, and I had to learn how to be okay with the fact that, number one, I felt at risk. The physiological part of this was that once the adrenaline was all gone, my body was exhausted, my mind was exhausted, emotionally I was exhausted. Even though I came home still kind of buzzing, I called my sister on the West Coast. I'm sure she probably thought, I don't know what's going on with my sister. But here's how I ended up having to manage that later, because what I had said to myself at that time was, I'm going to deal with this later, because the next day I still had to go back to work. And at that time, during those days, we didn't really know a whole lot about trauma response. So I ended up a couple of months, actually, it was almost 2 years later, I ended up sitting in front of a therapist. And the first thing that she said to me was, I just want you to access what you feel in your body, wherever you feel it. And then she said, I want you to think about something that wasn't a really big memory, but something that was enough that you felt emotional about it and you felt overwhelmed. And then she asked me to put it outside of myself, which was really brilliant because by taking it outside of myself, I wasn't re-experiencing it. All I was doing is looking at it as though I'm looking at a video of something else that happened to somebody else. In that, it was messy because that's what processing is when you're first learning to do it. By putting it outside of myself, I was able to notice what I was feeling. I had a lot of feelings about it. There was some frustration, there was some anger, there was some disappointment. There was me feeling like, I was incompetent, which surprised me. I was also kind of feeling the sense of overwhelm because in that moment I was thinking, I hadn't prepared anything for this. What if I die now here doing this? Is this how I want to die? Which, at the core of it, you would think, how in the world did I get there? But with the benefit of having some distance behind it, that's where my mind went. It said, what if I was going to die doing this? And then I got to kind of look at that a little bit more closely because she very rightly said to me, okay, had you have been injured or seriously hurt or you had died, what then? And it really got me to thinking. And again, because I'm looking at me, I'm like, well, but I survived. And she said, yes, you did. So part of that processing was the acceptance that there were things that were outside of my control, accepting that I couldn't maintain or manage all of that. And then what do I do with it now that I've accepted it? Well, there were other parts of it that I still needed to accept, because remember, this is just starting the process. Beginning to understand what's happening to me in my body, because I'll be honest, I didn't understand while I was sitting with her what this meant. I didn't understand, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to process? Because that's a fancy word, but what does it really mean? What it means is I'm taking a look at this, examining it, and deciding, what about that? What does that mean to me? And then, what am I feeling about it? And with the benefit of hindsight, a lot of things were lost because, thinking about it, going back even this many years later, I don't have an emotional charge around it, which that was the point of the processing, was to get me to a point where I could begin to examine this and not be emotionally overwhelmed and overcome by the thing that had happened. Well, by talking through this and then examining and exploring as though I'm looking at a video of somebody else doing this, what it also helped me to do was to recognize, you know what, I probably did make a whole lot of mistakes. Doesn't make me a failure. Didn't mean that I was incompetent. It meant that there were a lot of moving parts to a situation that was fluid and lasted quite a while. So it meant that there was some fatigue, and then there was a rise, and then some fatigue, and then a rise. So my body was trying to manage all of that. And then as I got working through this, trying to understand what was happening to me, what I was feeling, and where the incompetency came from. Well, part of the incompetency, for me at least, came from the fact that this was something I hadn't prepared for. I didn't know how I was going to respond. And then when I did, I got to the other side. It was hard for me to acknowledge that I not only survived that, but we successfully took care of the situation without anybody else getting hurt or dying or in any other way destroying property. It did cause quite a bit of commotion, though. We ended up shutting down I-94 to be able to take control of the situation. It never should have gotten to 94 because we all make mistakes. But in the process of this, by examining that, I then began to recognize, you know what, I had a lot more self-control than I realized. How did I frame it? How was I remembering it? And that's the other thing, that word, remember. Because when I'm pulling all that information forward, I'm having to retell myself that story. I'm looking at, what did I think? What did I feel? How did I understand it? What was my interpretation of what was happening at the time? What if that was in my control? What if that wasn't in my control? And then what do I do with that information now? So what I ended up doing in that session, and then about 2 or 3 more sessions after that, was she very gently brought me back to that and said, I'm wondering what about that you still need? What about that helps you to do a better job as a police officer? And, the interesting thing was, it's what I call a way homer. While I was driving one day to work, I thought, you know what? How that helps me is I can learn from those past mistakes and not make those mistakes again, but also the way that I am framing this as it's happening. I can look at this as something that happened to me. I can look at this as something I'm a participant in, or I can look at this as something that is happening around me, and I don't have to participate. So that's something that we'll talk more about in another video. But the important part of this for the processing piece is, by putting it outside of myself and examining it, I also gave myself an opportunity to do something really profound. I didn't have to have nightmares about it. I didn't have to feel hyper aroused. I didn't have to go back into a state of re-experiencing, because what I was telling myself was a different version of the story that said, not only did I survive, but I came out the other end and nobody got hurt. Now, that's the truth. That's what happened. But see, when it first happened, I felt like it happened to me, because I'm the one that stumbled onto this guy and saw him in his driveway, and that set off a whole chain of events. Because who knows what would have happened had I not have located this guy in the city of Springfield, and then all of a sudden we're on the road and he hadn't pointed the gun at his head. So again, there were a lot of things, there's a lot of layers to this, but by taking it a little bit at a time, examining it, and retelling yourself the story about how you came through the other side, because that's really what memory does. Memory stores things imperfectly. Your mind isn't a video camera. It's not holding on to things perfectly in an orderly sequence. What it does is it gloms things on based on how emotionally charged you were in that moment. And emotionally charged can also mean love. So sometimes we tell ourselves stories about the people that we love and the things that we enjoy in order to frame that so that we hold on to that and we can access that and we can re-experience that. But again, when we're re-experiencing it, we're telling ourselves a whole new story every time that we do it. Again, that's not to minimize what happened or to say that it didn't happen. That's to say that the brain, because it does it so imperfectly, it tries to make it make sense in the conscious mind. The unconscious mind says, it doesn't matter. I had a feeling, and these are the fragments of picture, sight, sound, and sensation that I put with it. And sometimes it gets messy because sometimes it gets confused with other memories that we have. Again, it's imperfect, but it's designed as a survival mechanism that ties very neatly in with our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And I would venture to say that it also does something else for us. It gives us information so that we can begin to build a library around how do we respond to things that overwhelm us, and then managing that overwhelm based on all of the times that we survive. Because again, the language that we use with us also impacts how we're storing those memories even when they're happening. So I know I kind of moved around a little bit here, but in terms of processing, the key takeaway here is that what we do is we put it outside of ourselves, and then we begin to pull the threads of the event and look for where's the highest charge in emotion. Second thing that we do is we kind of explore it and see what are the feelings that are around it, because of the 8 core emotions, we have about 10,000 possible feelings, but those feelings are really just ways of describing something that happens both in our body, because when I located it here in my chest. That's anxious, or at least that's consistent with other people that have also felt anxious. My word for it at the time was not anxious. My word for it at the time was, this is a disturbance. So I didn't even have a feeling really to go with that. Later on, I identified that core feeling as fear, because my fear was, what if he hurts somebody else? What if he hurts me? What if he hurts himself? Those fears were real. They're practical feelings, and I located them here. I wasn't so much excited about him hurting somebody, because that sounds bad to say, oh yeah, he's exciting. But excited in the sense that my senses were up, my emotions were high, because there was a sense of overwhelm. Because initially the overwhelm is, this is too much information for me to sort through to figure out what do I do next. Now, fortunately, once I recognized that I was going into that state where my vision was narrowing, my hands were starting to get cold and sweaty, and my breathing was getting short and quick, I slowed my breath down, shook my head, got on the radio. And even though it was a little bit of an excitement in terms of high pitch, it wasn't as high as, a more imminent threat event, but it was still up there. In that process, though, I ended up conveying the information necessary, backup showed up, and we navigated it. And again, it was a process. That process was pulling those threads and understanding what's happening. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What is my next right step? And then how do I, in the long term, deal with this? Now, again, part of processing is taking little steps, not taking great big steps, because you can have what's called an abreaction, which means something that feels overwhelming can lead us to a panic state. It can also lead us to significant health issues, because we tend to get stuck in those states. So we want to do this slowly, we want to do it gently, and we want to do it in a way that is meaningful and allows us to begin to let go of those things that we no longer need in that process. All right, well, I hope this was helpful. Leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. I'm happy to talk with you about it. And this is Kelly, your Kilted Therapist. Have a great day.